Far-right group, the Proud Boys, was an informer for the FBI. And a painting by the Renaissance master Sandro Botticelli goes under the hammer in New York.
At 80 million, last chance, and selling. Lilia, to you, congratulations. Only at Sotheby's for the Botticelli, $80 million.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, live from London.
Hello, I'm Moira Alderson with the BBC News. The Russian opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, has promised at a court hearing in which his appeal against his detention was struck down that he and his supporters won't be intimidated by the authorities. Mr. Navalny denounced the process as illegal. Sarah Rainsford is in Moscow.
Alexei Navalny's appeal was rejected. The opposition politician remains in custody. Mr. Navalny, who appeared in court via video link, called that ruling predetermined and the judge the obedient slave of a corrupt system. Vladimir Putin's biggest critic has been locked up ever since his return to Moscow after recovering from a poisoning he blames on Russia's president. So Alexei Navalny took the chance in court to address both the country and the Kremlin. His words still typically fierce, but with him behind bars, the authorities are now coming down hard on Mr. Navalny's team ahead of more mass protests this weekend.
Official data show the United States economy shrank by 3.5% last year as the pandemic shut down large sectors of business and public life. It was the worst year for the US economy since 1946. Michelle Fleury reports.
COVID-19 threw the US economy into reverse last year, causing it to contract by 3.5%. That's after years of steady growth. But the latest figures also reveal that by the end of the year, America's gross domestic product was again expanding at a healthy annualized rate of 4%. The head of the US's central bank has now said that nothing is more important to continued growth than Americans getting vaccinated.
President Biden has signed an executive order reopening access to the nation's online health insurance marketplace for people who can't obtain coverage through their employers. It's Mr. Biden's first move to try to rebuild Obamacare, the signature piece of legislation from the days of his vice presidency, but which was gutted by the Trump administration. Mr. Biden said it was imperative to make healthcare available to as many people as possible in the middle of a pandemic. The Pentagon says it's considering a request from the US Federal Emergency Management Agency to provide help in administering the COVID-19 vaccine. It said the Department of Defense was committed to doing as much as possible to assist the government's efforts and would determine what assets could be made available. In its first decisions, Facebook's new oversight board has ruled that the social media giant was wrong to take down 4 out of the 5 cases it's examined so far. Facebook has 7 days to restore the posts. It says it will comply. One post concerned a commentary on China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims. Another asserted drugs to cure COVID-19 exist. The rulings will be scrutinised for signs of how the board will handle Facebook's controversial suspension of Donald Trump's account. World News from the BBC. A special court in Colombia has charged 8 commanders of the former FARC rebel group with war crimes for taking hostages during the country's armed conflict and torturing and murdering them. Under the peace deal, the commanders face restrictions to their freedom if they accept the accusations, but could face up to 20 years in jail if they reject them. The Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sylvestre Ilunga Ilunkamba, has accepted Parliament's vote of no confidence in his government. This paves the way for President Felix Tshisekedi to appoint loyalists to key ministries, as he now holds the majority in Parliament. Mr. Ilunga is an ally of Mr. Tshisekedi's predecessor, Joseph Kabila. The former president of the Czech Republic, Václav Klaus, has been fined for breaching coronavirus rules in October by appearing at a public event without a face mask. The Prague Hygiene Authority says he must pay $465. Mr. Klaus says he'll refuse to pay it. A portrait by Italian Renaissance painter Sandro Botticelli has sold for $92 million at auction in New York, a record price for the artist. The 15th century work was one of the most significant portraits ever to appear at auction. Rebecca Jones has more on the sale.
For the Botticelli, $80 million. It's yours. Thank you very much indeed.
Ad buyer's premium, and the total price was more than $90 million.
Adult number 45.
The identity of the buyer, who was on the telephone, has not yet been revealed. The portrait shows a Renaissance nobleman dressed in an elegant tunic and holding a medallion. It's thought Botticelli painted it in the 1470s, around the time he was working on his most famous picture, The Birth of Venus. The highest price previously paid for a Botticelli was in 2013, when Madonna and Child with young St John the Baptist sold for $10.4 million.
BBC News.
You're listening to the newsroom.
Putin's not have something to do with this. You could put a political opponent behind bars. One thing you cannot do, though, is lock away, put out of sight, the public mood. And the Kremlin's problem is that with the economy here in difficulty, Russians feel that life is getting tougher. And that means growing dissatisfaction with the authorities. But the Kremlin has this warning. Illegal protest brings chaos. The last thing Russia needs, it says, is another Russian revolution.
Steve Rosenberg in Moscow. Pakistan's Supreme Court has ordered the release of 4 men who had been accused of the murder of the American journalist Daniel Pearl in 2002. The suspects, including a British-born man, were acquitted last year, but the Pakistani government and Mr. Pearl's family had attempted to have that decision overruled. This morning, their appeal was dismissed. Secunda Kamani reports from Islamabad.
Daniel Pearl's life hangs in the
Police in Pakistan have named a former British public...
Pakistani police say they believe a body...
The haunting images of Daniel Pearl, in chains with a gun to his head, released by his abductors, shocked the world. His beheading on camera, a grim precursor to the tactics that have become common amongst militant groups. Now, 19 years after they were originally found guilty, judges have acquitted 4 men accused of the murder, including Omar Sheikh, the British man alleged to have masterminded the kidnapping.
There's not a single thing that we don't miss our son.
Daniel Pearl's parents, Ruth and Judea, have described it as a travesty of justice. They released this statement last year.
We are standing up for justice, not only for our son, but for all our dear friends in Pakistan, so they can live in a society free of violence and terror, and raise their children in peace and harmony.
Omar Sheikh was born in Britain and attended the prestigious London School of Economics before being allegedly drawn into jihadist circles in Pakistan. I'm outside the hotel in Rawalpindi, where the prosecution said Omar Sheikh first met Daniel Pearl. They say laying a trap for him, pretending to be able to arrange an interview with a hardline cleric. Omar Sheikh's lawyers deny he was ever here. Pearl, though, did travel to Karachi, hoping for an interview. Instead, he was held hostage and then gruesomely beheaded. Omar Sheikh and 3 others were detained and charged. There seemed strong evidence he planned the abduction, but the legal case was riddled with flaws. It's now believed a senior Al-Qaeda operative, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, currently in Guantanamo Bay, was the one who actually carried out the beheading. Pakistani authorities, though, deliberately discounted evidence of that.
Well, Danny was a remarkable human being. He was a great friend and a loyal friend. And, he left my house when he went off for the interview, from which he didn't return.
Journalist Asra Nomani was a close friend of Daniel Pearl's and has led efforts to investigate the killing. She says Omar Sheikh should remain behind bars.
Omar Sheikh is the man responsible for Danny's kidnapping, and he is the man who set up the circumstances so that Danny was ultimately murdered. Danny is only dead because of Omar Sheikh, and Omar Sheikh has to be held responsible.
Today, though, the Supreme Court cleared Omar Sheikh of any wrongdoing. Nevertheless, it's not yet clear if he will now be released. US officials have indicated they may begin their own legal proceedings against him.
Secunda Kamani in Islamabad. It's been 3 weeks since supporters of Donald Trump stormed the US Capitol. More than 150 people have been arrested in connection with the riot, including at least 6 members of the far-right group, the Proud Boys. But it's now been discovered that the group's leader once worked as an informer for law enforcement. Peter Goffin reports.
The Proud Boys have been called a hate group by civil rights watchdogs and, just this week, designated a terrorist entity by the Canadian government. Anti-immigrant, all-male, and staunchly supportive of Donald Trump's presidency, the group has a long history of violence. Their national chairman, Enrique Tarrio, may not, therefore, seem a natural fit for maintaining law and order. But court documents show that Mr. Tario was an undercover informant who helped the U.S. authorities after pleading guilty to fraud nearly a decade ago. Mr. Tario has denied working with law enforcement, saying he doesn't recall any of the details presented to him by reporters. But a former federal prosecutor, Vanessa Singh Johannes, confirmed to Reuters news service that Mr. Tario provided information that led to the prosecution of 13 people in 2 separate cases. And a court transcript from 2014 shows Mr. Tario's lawyer asked for his prison sentence for fraud to be reduced, in light of what he called his client's prolific work informing on drug and human smuggling schemes. Several Proud Boys took part in the assault on the U.S. Capitol earlier this month. U.S. officials say they're investigating the extent to which the group may have helped plan it. But Mr. Tario was not there. He was arrested in Washington 2 days earlier, charged with illegally possessing high-capacity rifle magazines and with burning a Black Lives Matter flag stolen from a D.C. church. The FBI has since said they had information that Mr. Tario was planning to incite violence, as Congress voted to certify President Joe Biden's election victory.
Peter Goffin. Moira, you have some other stories from our news desk.
The Speaker of the US House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, has said that members face a security threat from what she called an enemy that is within Congress itself.
It means that we have members of Congress who want to bring guns on the floor and have threatened violence on other members of Congress.
Ms. Pelosi said she was consulting with the retired General Russell Honore about how best to boost security, and more money was likely to be needed to protect members of Congress from violence. Protests are taking place in cities across Poland against a near-total ban on abortion. In Warsaw, several hundred people turned out, despite falling snow and temperatures around 0 degrees Celsius, to block traffic on a road near the Prime Minister's office. It's the second night of protests following the government's decision on Wednesday to enforce the abortion ruling in October by the Constitutional Court. The European Commission says a study of websites it conducted with national consumer protection agencies has revealed extensive evidence of greenwashing by companies. It says 42% of the environmental claims it examined were exaggerated, false or deceptive, and potentially illegal. It's also criticised the use of vague terms such as eco-friendly or sustainable without giving consumers the means to substantiate them. And the US Senator Bernie Sanders says he's raised $1.8 million for charity over the past 5 days through the sale of merchandise with his image at President Biden's inauguration earlier this month. The picture launched hundreds of memes, and the 79-year-old decided to put the Chairman Sanders merch, including T-shirts, sweatshirts and stickers, on his campaign website last week. The first run sold in half an hour, and there is now a long backlog of orders. The monies will be distributed to several charities in his home state of Vermont, including Meals on Wheels.
Thank you. The British government has taken down an advert on social media urging people to stay home and save lives after it was criticised for stereotyping women. The poster, which warned the new COVID-19 variant was spreading fast, depicted women undertaking a range of domestic activities, as our political correspondent Chris Mason reports.
The advert attempts to illustrate what might be going on inside 4 households during lockdown. One shows a woman in dungarees with a bucket gesticulating at a girl brandishing a mop. Another has a mum holding a baby while staring at an ironing board. A third has a woman on her knees clutching a book with 2 children, one either side of her, at a table. The only man to feature appears to be stroking a cat while relaxing on a sofa in the company of, one assumes, his partner and their child. Labour said it looks like 1953. The Prime Minister's official spokesman said the poster did not reflect our view of women and added, "We've removed it."
Chris Mason. An extremely rare portrait by the Renaissance master Sandro Botticelli has gone under the hammer at Sotheby's and sold for $92 million, a record for any work by the artist. Farhana Dawood reports.
The virtual auction was held in New York with bidders on the phone to Sotheby's staff and online. This was the moment young man holding a roundel was sold.
At 80 million, last chance, and selling. Lilia, to you, congratulations. Only at Sotheby's for the Botticelli, $80 million. it's yours. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you so much.
The auction may have lacked the usual excitement of a blockbuster sale, but the price didn't. Including fees and commissions, it was just over $92 million. The 15th century piece is a portrait of a young male noble sitter, perhaps a Medici family member. The man, dressed in a simple tunic, holds a roundel or medallion depicting a saint. The artwork is thought to date back to 1480 and is one of only around a dozen surviving works by Botticelli. The painting last sold in 1982 for just over $1 million, which was an incredibly high price at the time. Its current price breaks the artist's previous record of $10.5 million, made by the auction of Madonna and Child with young St. John the Baptist 8 years ago.
Fahana Dawood. Plenty more, as always, in the Global News podcast, which is made by the same team. Thanks for listening to the newsroom.
Coming next on the BBC World Service, you can hear the latest sports news. And in 30 minutes, we're on assignment.
I'm Rebecca Henschke in London, and with Grace Soy in Hong Kong, I've been following two young pro-democracy activists. One fled to the UK. The other, despite being arrested, wants to stay and continue the fight.
2030 GMT, it's science in action. Here's Roland Pease.
As arguments grow about how much vaccine for COVID-19 there is and who is first in line to get it, I'm digging deeper into the advantages of the vaccines based on RNA and hearing about a souped-up version that could stretch supplies much further.
The 23 GMT, we ask, is online censorship going too far?
So when you are now turning that into criminal behavior, saying that you are inciting an insurrection, you are essentially criminalizing free speech.
With news every half hour, this is the BBC World Service.
Hello, I'm Lee James, and this is Sport Today on the BBC World Service, bringing you the sports stories the world is talking about. Can Liverpool rediscover their magic touch in front of goal as Jurgen Klopp's side face Tottenham Hotspur in the Premier League? Tokyo organisers tell us the Olympic and Paralympic Games will go ahead this year and cancellation isn't being considered. And we hear from the female basketball referee who made history in the NBA. That's all coming up in 2 minutes.
BBC News with Moira Alderson. In his first move to rebuild Obamacare, President Biden has signed an executive order restoring access to the online health insurance marketplace for people who can't obtain coverage through their employers. Mr. Biden said it was imperative to make healthcare available in the middle of a pandemic. The Pentagon says it's considering a request from the US Federal Emergency Management Agency to provide help in administering the COVID-19 vaccine. The US economy shrank by 3.5% last year as the pandemic shut down large sectors of business and public life. It marks the worst year for the US economy since 1946. Facebook's new oversight board has ruled that the social media giant was wrong to take down 4 out of the 5 cases it's examined so far. These first rulings will be scrutinised for signs of how the board will handle Facebook's controversial suspension of Donald Trump's account. There's been another night of protests in cities across Poland against the new restrictive abortion laws. In Warsaw, demonstrators blocked the traffic near the Prime Minister's office and then began a march through the city. A special court in Colombia has charged 8 commanders of the former FARC rebel group with war crimes for taking hostages during the country's armed conflict and torturing and murdering them. Villagers in northwestern Nigeria say at least 30 people have been kidnapped in Kaduna State. They said gunmen arrived in Kungi village on motorbikes in the middle of the night, seizing people and killing 1 person. The European Commission says a study's revealed extensive evidence of greenwashing by companies. It says 42% of the environmental claims it examined were exaggerated, false or deceptive. A portrait by the Renaissance painter Sandro Botticelli has sold for $92 million at auction. BBC News.
Over the wall, and it's into the net! And that's been driven beautifully.
Serena Williams, Wimbledon champion, touchdown. Rebound James.
How they get then? Precise left hook.
Live from the BBC World Service, this is Sport Today.
Hello, I'm Lee James. Coming up this Thursday, Tokyo organisers remain confident the rescheduled Olympics and Paralympics will go ahead.
We are absolutely focused on
delivering the games this summer.
And the female basketball referee who made history in the NBA.
I was so pumped up. All the positive reinforcements we were getting from people across the sports world. We just took that into the game and we were basically on cloud 9 all day.
More from Jenna Schroeder as two women are part of the same NBA refereeing team for the first time. But first, can the champions Liverpool respond after a shock defeat for their rivals in the Premier League title race?
Burke with a shot, which is deflected into the back of the net. And incredibly, for the second time tonight, Sheffield United lead at Old Trafford.
Yes, substitute Oliver Burke came off the bench to give the bottom club Sheffield United a rare victory over Manchester United. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's side now find themselves 1 point behind the leaders Manchester City, who also have a game in hand. The holders Liverpool are 7 points off the top. They haven't won in 5 matches, and they're at Tottenham Hotspur tonight. It kicks off shortly. Our football reporter Tom Gale is here with the team news, and no Fabinho for Liverpool, Tom.
That's right, Lee. Liverpool confirmed the Brazilian is out with a minor muscle issue. So their versatile captain Jordan Henderson slots into central defence. That's just one of 4 changes following that 1-0 home defeat against Burnley. Jurgen Klopp gives James Milner the nod over Xherdan Shaqiri in midfield. Up top, out go Divock Origi and Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. Welcome back Firmino and Mo Salah. Tottenham, a lot simpler for Jose Mourinho. Just the one change following their 3-1 win at Sheffield United. Republic of Ireland international Matt Doherty comes in for the injured Serge Reguilon. Full lineups on the BBC Sport website right now.
Well, Spurs are just a point behind their opponents, and by the sounds of it, Jurgen Klopp shouldn't necessarily expect a warm reception from Jose Mourinho.
I'm not a friend of Jurgen because I never had time with Jurgen. Nuno, he was my player. Brandon, in my club for a couple of years together. So when you have something in common, when you know the person well, you can say, I like him, he's my friend. I don't like him, he's not my friend. With Jurgen, is 5 minutes before a match, 5 minutes after a match. What can I say about Jurgen? He's a colleague that I respect, that I don't have any problem with him. And I believe he's the same with me.
In this world, we are losing trust and faith much too quick everywhere. Everything is great or everything is the opposite. I see them trying, I see them working on it and all that stuff. And they didn't have to be perfect. We still can win games.
Well, the former Liverpool defender Stephen Warnock joins us now on Sport Today. Are you one of those, Stephen, losing trust and faith, as Jurgen Klopp says, in Liverpool, or do you believe they can turn around this mini slump?
I've never lost faith in what he's doing. I think you only have to look at what he's done over the last couple of years to understand what he's capable of achieving. And when you look into what they've achieved so far this season, holding first position for numerous weeks and without his recognised centre-back pairing with key injuries that he's suffered all over, throughout the team, I think it's why you'd lose faith in someone so quickly. I don't understand, and I fully understand what he means.
Stephen, who do you think this is the bigger game for, Spurs or Liverpool?
You look at it on form and you say Liverpool, because Liverpool need a result. They need a win to sort of stop those doubters if you want. Also to keep themselves close to the top pack. But from a psychological point of view, Spurs need this victory more than Liverpool, because they suffer in big games against Liverpool, and their record of late hasn't been great against them. So they need to win this game for their own psychological point of view, and to try and give them a push towards winning that Premier League title.
We can't talk about any of the big teams in Europe without mentioning the managers, these two in particular, Klopp and Mourinho, such personas, captivating viewing. How much motivation do you think Jose has to get one over on Klopp, considering Klopp does have the better record when they've met together?
It'll always frustrate him because of his pedigree within the game, his ability to go toe-to-toe with the best managers in the world, in world football. And listen, let's not get away from it. He is one of the best managers in world football, but he'll want to beat Jurgen Klopp to say that he's doing it on a regular basis and trying to prove people wrong. For Jose, it's all about being able to walk into a meeting or a press conference and say, I've beaten one of the best, and because I am the best as well. And that's the type of personality that he has.
And in terms of the race for the title, is this more a must not lose? Would a draw satisfy both parties?
I don't think it would. I think on paper, maybe they'll walk away depending on how the game goes and say, okay, a draw was a good result today. But Jurgen Klopp's always goes into every game to win it. You can always see that the way his teams go about the business. You never see them going to settle for a draw anywhere. It's always about winning the game. So he'll be disappointed if he doesn't come away with 3 points. Jose Mourinho, depending on how the game goes, he'll always try and put a positive spin on it. Whether they've sat back and tried to defend deep, he'll always come out and say that we deserved 3 points. We did more. He was open about that when the teams were at Anfield and said that he felt that his team was better. Jurgen Klopp came out and said the same thing about his team. Who would the draw suit most? I'd probably say it would suit Tottenham more than Liverpool. But I think both will be disappointed if they don't come away with 3 points.
Just a final one then, Stephen. Liverpool beat Tottenham 2-1 at Anfield last month. They were moved 3 points clear at the top. They were odds on to retain the title. Do you think they can still retain it if they were to lose tonight?
Yeah, I do, because I look at the league table and I think, I know they'd be possibly falling further behind the leaders, but you know what this season can throw up. We've seen it. It takes one key injury to a team. A loss of form, a dip in form. I look at Manchester United and losing against Sheffield United, and everyone's saying, well, Ollie's not the right man. Man United are in big problems. They forget about what's happened before that, and that's what often people forget, is the runs that teams are capable of going on and putting together. Everyone forgets about Manchester City at the start of the season and the poor run that they started on because of the form now. You're gonna have poor spells in the season, especially this season, and in the way that the season is without the fans there, with the pandemic in place, and how difficult it is for the players to motivate themselves. So Liverpool aren't out of it yet, and they won't be if they lose the game tonight.
My thanks to Stephen Warner, former Liverpool defender. Now, after Manchester United's loss to Sheffield United, the club have said they are disgusted after Axel Tuanzebe and Anthony Martial were racially abused on social media. Both players started that match. So, Tom, what have United said?
Lee, that they utterly condemn the abuse of both players and have a zero tolerance against any form of racism or discrimination. They also add, identifying those anonymous, mindless idiots remains problematic, and the club urged social media platforms and the authorities to strengthen measures to prevent this kind of behaviour. The club captain, Harry Maguire, he's posted on social media, "United against racism, we will not tolerate it." That's alongside a picture of him taking the knee before last night's game. Midfielder Scott McTominay says he was disgusted reading the comments, and Manchester United's former club captain Rio Ferdinand has described the abuse as a disgrace and says these ignorant idiots need to be exposed. Well, let's hear reaction on players being targeted for racist abuse from the former Newcastle and West Ham goalkeeper Shaka Hislop, who's been speaking to our Sports Hour programme here on BBC World Service. The ex-Trinidad and Tobago international is a key figure and long-term campaigner for the anti-racism education charity Show Racism the Red Card.
For all the awareness that ours and so many other campaigns have raised. You've seen, and you mentioned Manchester United and Tuanzebe in his game yesterday, and the racist abuse that he's had to experience as a young man, just trying to ply his trade, trying to live his own boyhood dream. I was involved in a roundtable earlier this week with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport about government's own responsibility towards dealing and confronting social media companies and the abuse that's allowed to fester on their platforms. Just as we link arms and have linked arms over 25 years in dealing with these issues, I think the moment calls for exactly that same approach and resolve even more today.
That's Shaka Hislop from the anti-racism education charity Show Racism the Red Card.
Live on the BBC World Service, this is Sport Today with Lee James.
Now, will the postponed Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics go ahead later this year? The president of the International Olympic Committee, Thomas Bach, says they're fully concentrated and committed to the successful and safe delivery of the Games, despite the COVID-19 pandemic. But how will the Games work and what measures would have to be in place? Musa Takaya is a spokesperson for the Tokyo 2020 organising committee. He told the BBC's Rachel Burden they have never considered cancelling the Games.
We have never discussed such the scenarios with the IOC and other key parties. Once again, we are absolutely focused on delivering the Games this summer.
You say it will be different to previous Olympic Games. What is this one going to look like then?
The Games will be different from the traditional Olympic and Paralympic Games. First of all, concerning athletes, we would have to request those athletes to follow certain guidances. They have to submit their testing results even before their departure, traveling to Japan. Even during their stay in Japan, they have to go through multiple testings in order to prove themselves negative for infections. We would have to request athletes arrive in the Olympic and Paralympic village 5 days prior to their competitions. We will also have to request them to leave their village within 48 hours after their competitions.
What about spectators? Are you expecting to be welcoming any international visitors?
We are discussing how many spectators we would be able to accommodate in venues and how we can accommodate spectators from overseas. That's going to be decided in spring. So we are under discussion right now.
What about the idea that you insist on all athletes, all competitors being vaccinated beforehand? Is that something that you would like to see?
Vaccination will be very important in order to get our society recovered as quickly as possible. In that respect, the latest development we are observing right now is a very, very positive sign. But in the meantime, our Games plan is that we will deliver the Games even without vaccines. So under that assumption, we are further preparing and refining our plan for the delivery of the Games.
That's Musa Takaya, a spokesperson for the Tokyo 2020 organising committee. The BBC Sports News correspondent Alex Capstick is here. The Tokyo organisers then, Alex, sounding confident they can host the Games. Do they have the support then of all the Olympic stakeholders to go ahead?
Well, according to Toshiro Mori, he's the chairman of the organising committee. He was told by Thomas Bach, the IOC president, in a video conference earlier today that all of the relevant groups involved in the Games, that they're all fully behind the plans to stage the Olympics in Japan this year. He said there were no questioning voices from anyone, anywhere. And these stakeholders include sports federations, national Olympic committees, sponsors, broadcasters, and athletes, who are perhaps the most important group of all. Although, as we highlighted on the programme yesterday, that claim has been contradicted by the double Olympic champion Christian Taylor, who also runs the Athletes Association. He said that his members were divided 50-50 on whether or not the Games should go ahead. We also know that the Japanese public is opposed to the plans for staging it this year, and there are officials within the Japanese coalition government who've expressed their doubts. But if the support that Toshiro Mori and Thomas Bach are talking about, if that holds firm, then that will be important and give them a much better chance of making the opening ceremony on July the 23rd.
How convinced are you then by the organisers' assertions that the Games can actually happen then, and events can even be held without vaccination being a prerequisite for the athletes?
Well, what's been made repeatedly clear is a determination, Lee, to pull this off. The IOC needs it because of all the broadcast revenue it provides. 75% of its overall budget comes from TV rights. The organisers in Japan desperately want it, partly because they've spent $15.5 billion preparing for the Games. It's also a source of immense pride, and the politicians won't fancy losing out to China, which hosts the 2022 Winter Games in Beijing, of being the country to stage the first COVID Olympics. All of the various scenarios that they're working on are on the basis that a vaccine, as you heard in that clip in your introduction, on the basis that a vaccine won't be available. And they are extremely detailed, these plans. The simulations the Japanese have been testing take into account the moment athletes land in the country, their time in the village, at competition venues, right the way through to them getting on the plane back home. I mean, it's obviously going to be easier if everyone is vaccinated. That's what they would like in a perfect world, but I think they realise that probably isn't going to happen.
Alex, thank you. That's Alex Capstick. To cricket now, and Pakistan remain in a strong position to win the first Test match against South Africa in Karachi. The hosts were eventually bowled out for 378 on the third day, with Kagiso Rabada picking up his 200th Test wicket, and then restricted the tourists to 187 for 4. It gives South Africa the slender lead of 29 runs. ESPN Cricinfo's Southern Africa correspondent, Fidoza Munda, joins us on Sport Today. After some determined batting then, Fidoza, how damaging would it be for South Africa's hopes to have lost those 3 wickets towards the end of the day?
Yeah, not good at all, especially considering who they were that they lost. So Faf du Plessis, the former captain, has batted really well so far since stepping down from the captaincy. He got a career best 199 against Sri Lanka at home. He's probably looking the most composed of the top order batsmen. But then they also lost the 2 set batsmen, Aiden Markram and Rassie van der Dussen. So there's a night watchman out there, Keshav Maharaj, and then the captain, Quinton de Kock, and there's quite a lot of pressure on him since becoming captain and moving to number 5. He hasn't batted very well. He made some poor decisions in the field on the second day, so I think a lot of eyes on Quinton de Kock and the number 6 as well, Temba Bavuma.
Pakistan will not want the lead to get too large, though, will they, to leave them with a potentially tricky run chase in the second innings, especially with Rabada picking up the wickets?
Yeah, exactly. I think, we're all expecting that this pitch will break up and probably take a little bit more turn, perhaps on the 4th day, probably by the 5th day, but it has surprised us so far. After it really looked as though the pitch was very spinner friendly on the first day and then seemed to flatten out on the second and third days, and it actually looks quite good to bat on. So I think probably anything under 200 Pakistan would fancy themselves to get. Obviously, if they can get South Africa out with a lead of around 150, 170, then they'll be pretty confident. But I think definitely advantage Pakistan unless Quinton de Kock goes absolutely crazy and we see quick runs from him tomorrow.
Fidoza, thank you very much for joining us, Fidoza Munda, with the latest then from the Test match in Karachi. Staying with cricket, Australia's Big Bash, the domestic 2020 competition, is entering its finals after an unprecedented 56 games. Brisbane Heat will take on the Adelaide Strikers for the right to play the Sydney Thunder, while the top 2 in the table meet on Saturday. The 2-time champions Sydney Sixers face the 3-time winners Perth Scorchers, who will be simply looking for more of the same.
Big hike in the air from Morning Morkel. Has he got enough? No, he doesn't. Wicket is taken. Hardy with the catch. Morkel goes for 2. The game comes to an end. 115 all out of the Brisbane Heat, and a victory for the Perth Scorchers by 59 runs.
ABC Sports' Clint Wilden joins us now on Sport Today. Clint, first of all then, that's going to be pretty mouth-watering, isn't it? The clash between the top 2, the Sydney Sixers and the Perth Scorchers. How do you see that going?
It's going to be fascinating, isn't it? And these 2 sides have met at this ground before to decide a Big Bash crown. So plenty of history between these 2 teams and plenty of excitement, particularly for West Australians, because there's 2 West Australians heavily involved. Josh Philippi, I reckon, will play an amazing role in how this game pans out. For simple reasons, when he gives the Sixers a bright start, they usually win. A lot of interest with Jai Richardson, who I personally thought was unlucky not to get named in the South African Test touring team. He says he's fairly happy with getting picked to the T20 international side that will make its way across to New Zealand. But Richardson has been remarkable. He's the leading wicket taker in the competition, 27 wickets and an economy rate of 7.08. And that's most impressive off the back is this is the first tournament that he's been involved with since having significant shoulder surgery. One of the more interesting things has that for the longer home and away series of the Big Bash League, in recent years when they've extended it, it has become quite ho-hum at the end of the home and away series. That wasn't the case at all. Pretty much every game was live going into the final game. And while the crowds have been understandably down around the nation because teams have been forced to play away from home, most interestingly here, the Sixers, who are so dominant in recent years at the SCG, have not played a game at home yet this summer. They're hoping that if they go through to the final, they might be able to host that at the SCG. We'll have to wait and see.
Now, away from the Big Bash, there is the Test series coming up between Australia and South Africa. Now, this is yet to be finalised, some of the details of this, and they regard the biosecurity protocols that Australia is expecting when they visit South Africa. And Cricket Australia, Clint, coming in for some criticism about their need for their players to be vaccinated.
It's certainly raised a couple of eyebrows. It's not uncommon, this suggestion, and there's also been talk about the Australian athletes heading to Tokyo, a number of the swimmers. I can understand why Cricket Australia, whose concern must be for the players, why they've asked the question. It hasn't been a demand, but they have asked the question of the medical authorities. And there's also, in the last 24 hours, the news coming through that Cricket Australia has asked those involved in South Africa who will be dealing with their team to undertake a 3-week quarantine before they do so. I've got no doubt what happened with England when they called their tour short has concerned the Australians. We know that South Africa has enormous problems with COVID, and the Australians would be concerned by that. This is a nation that has been unbelievably risk-averse, and we've seen locking down entire states and cities. I mean, I'm in a state, Western Australia, that hasn't had a community case since April. Now, I know that that's hard to sort of wrap your head around for the rest of the world, particularly in England, the United States, for example. This is hard to actually comprehend, but Australia has been incredibly risk-averse. I think Cricket Australia, understandably, is going to adopt that policy with their players. And there's certainly some talk around if the tour doesn't go ahead, with South Africa being so desperate for it to continue, perhaps maybe they make an offer to see the tour actually played in Australia in some shape or form. So there is still a lot to go through, but I do understand that Cricket Australia is absolutely aware of its obligations. And if they can go to South Africa and make sure their players are safe and in a biosecure bubble, they'll do so.
That's the ABC's Clint Weldon. There's more on the issues surrounding Australia's tour of South Africa on this week's episode of Stumped. The podcast is available to download now. Elsewhere this Thursday, the 3-time Grand Slam tennis champion Naomi Osaka has invested in professional women's football team, North Carolina Courage. The club, who were formed 4 years ago, compete at the highest level in the US, the National Women's Soccer League. And Osaka, who's preparing for next month's Australian Open, says she's proud, adding that the women who have invested in me growing up made me who I am today. And South Africa's Richard Sterney holds a one-shot lead after the first round of golf's Dubai Desert Classic.
Sport Today from the BBC World Service.
Now, NBA history was made this week as Jenna Schroeder and Natalie Sago became the first 2 women to work together refereeing a game. The duo joined Sean Wright to oversee the Orlando Magic beat the Charlotte Hornets. Jenna's been speaking to Sport Today's Sarah Mulcairns about how it felt to be out on the court.
It was an amazing feeling, like the entire day. Once it hit social media, it completely blew up and I was just jacked up. I was so pumped up. All the positive reinforcements we were getting from people across the sports world before the game even started. It just gave us so much energy and it made us so proud that we just took that into the game and we were basically on cloud 9 all day.
So how important was it, a step of having the two of you appear there?
You know, it was really important. It's the first time it's ever been done. And I think if we keep breaking these barriers and keep breaking these first, then we will finally get to a point of complete equality, especially gender equality. And we won't have to have all these firsts anymore. So it's just a step in the right direction as far as gender equality, especially in sports.
And so how long do you think it will be before we get an all-women crew?
I don't know how long it will take for an all-female crew. I just know that when they put the two of us out there, we only got positive reactions. So I think that gives the NBA even more confidence to put 3 women out to do a game one day.
Yeah, and you definitely saw that. You mentioned it a little bit yourself on social media. What's been some of your favourite messages that you've received?
I said it a couple times, but Billie Jean King, I mean, she's been fighting this gender equality battle for decades. And what she's did in the past, it just empowers me. And then also Megan Rapinoe, she's such an icon that just for them to reach out, it meant the world to me and Natalie. So it's just very empowering. And women who empower other women, that's amazing.
You'd be saving those messages for life, no doubt.
Absolutely.
And you speak about women empowering other women. And if you look at a couple of weeks' time at the Super Bowl, we're going to have Sarah Thomas taking charge there. Do you sense a change in terms of female representation in, officiating across a range of sports?
Yeah, I do sense a change. It's only a small change, though. It's really just in the NBA. We have women officials and then one official in the NFL, but the other professional sports, really, there's no women officials represented. So I'm hoping that will change. Putting Sarah on the biggest stage, basically in sports, and doing the Super Bowl is a huge step in the right direction. And in the officiating world, I can just speak from the NBA side of it, getting to work either the finals or the Super Bowl, that's a huge accomplishment in any referee's, career. So I feel like I'm more happy for Sarah than Sarah probably is. I'm rooting for her.
That's the NBA referee, Jenna Schroeder. Well, elsewhere on the NBA court, the Los Angeles Lakers' record-breaking winning streak on the road came to an end. They were edged out by the Philadelphia 76ers, 107-106. I'll be back at the same time on Friday, where we'll look ahead to all the weekend's sporting action, including the Premier League. But that's it from Sport Today.
Sport Today is a BBC Sport production for the BBC World Service.
This is the BBC World Service.
I was walking around that hospital like a zombie.
I'm Marie Keyworth. I'll be exploring the idea that we can feel too much empathy and compassion.
Right now, I can't face picking another parent up off the floor.
And how can we steel ourselves against the distress without becoming hard-hearted?
The fatigue that we have is not letting ourselves feel that.
Compassion Fatigue, Sunday at 14 GMT. And in 30 minutes, it's Science in Action with Roland Pease.
As arguments grow about how much vaccine for COVID-19 there is and who is first in line to get it, I'm digging deeper into the advantages of the vaccines based on RNA and hearing about a souped-up version that could stretch supplies much further.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Welcome to Assignment on the BBC World Service. I'm Rebecca Henschke in London, and with my colleague Grace Soy in Hong Kong, we've been following two young pro-democracy activists. Now, in the wake of a sweeping national security law, one has decided to flee to the UK.
If Hong Kong is still under the control of the Chinese Communist Party, it will be difficult. I may not be able to see him for the rest of my life.
But his friend has stayed in Hong Kong to continue the fight.
I just saw a lot of police filming. Every 10 steps, there were riot police standing guard.
Meanwhile, in the north of England, his friend is feeling homesick and helpless.
I was so far away and couldn't do anything. With everything, I felt a bit lost and didn't know what to do.
That's Assignment after the news.
Hello, I'm Chris Barrow with the BBC News. President Biden has signed an executive order reopening access to the nation's online health insurance marketplace for people who cannot obtain coverage through their employers. It's Mr. Biden's first move to try to rebuild Obamacare, the signature piece of legislation from the days of his vice presidency, but which was gutted by the Trump administration. Mr. Biden said accessible healthcare was vital during the pandemic.
The first one I'm going to be signing here is the Strengthen Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. And of all times that we need to reinstate access to, affordability of, and extent of access to Medicaid is now, in the middle of this COVID crisis.
The president also rescinded legislation that banned US funding for international non-profit organizations that provide abortion counseling. The Pentagon says it's considering a request from the US Federal Emergency Management Agency to provide help in administering the COVID-19 vaccine. It said the Department of Defense was committed to doing as much as possible to assist the government's efforts. In its first decisions, Facebook's new oversight board has ruled that the social media giant was wrong to take down 4 out of the 5 cases it's examined so far. Facebook has 7 days to restore the posts. It says it will comply. One post concerned a commentary on China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims. James Clayton reports.
The way Facebook moderates its platform has never been under more scrutiny. With so much fake news and hate speech on social media, Facebook decided to set up an oversight board last year, which it claims is independent. Another case was upheld by the panel for a demeaning slur aimed at Azerbaijanis. Donald Trump will be looking at the process closely. His posts are regularly some of the most engaged with on Facebook. His account is currently suspended indefinitely, but could be overturned by the board.
For the second night in a row, protests are taking place in cities across Poland against a near-total ban on abortion. They were triggered by the entry into force on Wednesday of a ruling by the Constitutional Court that outlawed terminations due to severe and irreversible fetal abnormalities. From Warsaw, here's Adam Easton.
In Warsaw, a crowd turned out despite falling snow to block traffic on a road near the Prime Minister's office. Protesters chanted the words, "Freedom, equality, abortion on demand." One young couple held a banner with the words, "Dear world, save Polish women from the sadistic government." There were similar protests in other cities. Poland already had one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the EU before the ruling, and a clear majority of Poles opposed making it any stricter.
World news from the BBC. Villagers in northwestern Nigeria say at least 30 people have been kidnapped in Kaduna State. They said gunmen arrived in Kungi village on motorbikes in the middle of the night, seizing people and killing one person. In neighbouring Katsina, 11 people were killed on Wednesday when gunmen raided 2 villages. A special court in Colombia has charged 8 commanders of the former FARC rebel group with war crimes for taking hostages during the country's armed conflict and torturing and murdering them. Candace Piet reports.
The 300-page indictment is based on the testimony of more than 1,000 victims. It describes at least 30 years of what it said was a systematic practice of kidnapping by the former rebels. Prosecutors say at least 20,000 people were abducted, almost 2,000 of whom were never heard of again. Prisoners were used as pawns to be exchanged for money or FARC detainees. One soldier spent 14 years in the hands of the rebels. The former FARC commanders are also accused of the murder, torture and sexual abuse of their kidnapped victims.
Officials in the town of Gainesville in the US state of Georgia say a leak of liquid nitrogen at a poultry plant has killed 6 people. Firefighters said around 130 workers from the Prime Pack Foods plant were taken by bus to a local church to be examined for injuries. There are reports that several firefighters were injured. The factory produces cuts for food companies. A portrait by Italian Renaissance painter Sandro Botticelli has sold for $92 million at auction in New York, a new record price for the artist. The identity of the buyer was not immediately known. The auctioneers Sotheby's said the 15th century portrait of a young man was one of the most significant portraits of any period ever to appear at auction. BBC News.
Hello and welcome to Assignment on the BBC World Service. A black flag is pushed into a suitcase packed with clothes and gadgets. At the age of 25, a man we're calling H is leaving home, going overseas alone, fleeing.
I don't want to go. I was born and raised in Hong Kong, so I have really mixed feelings. But I have great fears about what will happen if I stay.
His mother quietly says goodbye to her only child.
I'm heartbroken. He will not be there if anything happens to me. And I won't be able to take care of him. I can't make him soup. I want my son by my side, but there is no other way. At this point, it's better for him to leave.
A friend is taking him to the airport. A taxi thought too risky. They drive through the city at night, where for over a year H has been involved in mass protests, demanding more democracy in Hong Kong and less Chinese influence. A movement that ended with the government crackdown and the arrests of its young leaders.
Last year's mass protests, fueled by fears that China was undermining Hong Kong's freedoms, have been stopped by a sweeping national security law.
The Communist Party is making no apologies for the law, saying it's brought back stability.
The security law gives authorities unprecedented new powers to shape life in Hong Kong. Its critics say it closes down protest and freedom of speech. As they get close to the airport, H turns to his friend.
My brain isn't functioning that well. I feel like an exile or a refugee.
In his bag is a key document, a British national overseas passport, offering him a route to UK citizenship. But England's not a place he really wants to go.
The British climate doesn't suit me. My English might not be fluent enough to deal with daily life, and there's cultural differences. But when it comes to a moment like this, you can't worry too much and can only go step by step.
I'm Rebecca Henschke, the BBC's Asia editor here in London. Almost every day over the last 18 months, I've been on the phone with our Hong Kong reporter, Grace Soy, who's been covering the pro-democracy protests that rocked her home city.
During that time, I got to know a group of protesters. 4 men, united by a common mission to preserve Hong Kong's legal system and autonomy from Beijing. They call each other Sao Chuk, a Cantonese term which can loosely be translated as comrade.
And they're now at a crossroad. Do they leave or do they stay? The youngest we're calling H to protect his identity. A few weeks after he left, Grace went to see his mother. She too doesn't want to be named for fear of a backlash from the authorities.
She pulled out baby photos of H, proudly laying image after image of her only son. Here he's just a few months old, she said. He was a very cute baby but was often sick.
My son has a good personality. He loves his dad and mum very much. But he wasn't very obedient when he reached the rebellious age.
Hong Kong for his generation, his mother says, hasn't been an easy place to grow up in. Good jobs are hard to get, and there's political repression she never thought possible.
Hong Kong used to be very free. You could say what you want, live the way you wanted. But now if you say something, you have to worry about the consequences. There is invisible pressure. You don't dare to say something critical of the government in public.
Hong Kong says good night to one sovereign and good morning to another.
H was 2 years old in 1997 when Britain, colonial ruler of Hong Kong for over 150 years, handed back the territory to China.
Now, Hong Kong people are to run Hong Kong. That is the promise, and that is the unshakable destiny.
Beijing promised to maintain certain freedoms of speech that do not exist in mainland China and an independent legal system. They called it one country, two systems. Ever since, H's youth has been dominated by a battle to honour that promise. The latest spark was a move to introduce an extradition treaty that could see Hong Kongers charged with criminal offences tried in mainland China.
H joined a group on the encrypted app Telegram, created by a 30-year-old man we are calling Ah Ching. The Telegram groups work as a place to share information, where to meet, what to wear, how to fight back against pro-Beijing groups and the police. In their chat group, they also shared boxing videos and sometimes just talk about girls, Arching says.
H and I think we are Saojuks, comrades. We are not intimate friends, but we share the same goal.
To protect freedom of speech. For H, it was also about fighting to keep the uniqueness of Hong Kong.
I was motivated by my identity as a Hong Konger and a recognition of the Hong Kong culture. I feel a sense of mission to keep the uniqueness of Hong Kong, so I took to the street to express my voice.
What started peacefully became increasingly confrontational.
This is not a protest anymore. This is turning into urban warfare.
Police use pepper spray, tear gas and rubber bullets. Protesters at times responding with bamboo poles and petrol bombs. H's mum watched live streams of the protest, terrified.
I begged him not to go out. I said to him, I can't cope with this anymore. While watching live, I felt nervous. I wanted to cry and my brain couldn't function anymore. It's too much and it was really painful. My blood pressure could rise and I could have a stroke anytime.
In the northern English town of Sheffield, Thomas, H's best friend, was also closely watching events unfold.
I tried a few times to switch off, but sadly I couldn't. Okay, I have to know what's going on right now. My friends are there, my families are there. I can't just, ignore them. And it is quite sad to see your hometown, your homeland, being in this situation where it's almost unrecognizable. When I was a kid, when I was still in Hong Kong wasn't like that. We were more or less like a free-speaking society.
Every day, he messaged H.
So we went to the same school, and then right now I'm just trying to help him as much as I can because he's my friend. Message him every day, just make sure he's okay, make sure he's not arrested or injured and everything. There's not too much I could do, but I guess it's I just want him to know that I was there for him.
A day after Beijing enforced the national security law, the UK responded.
Now Boris Johnson is threatening to stimulate a mass exodus from Hong Kong by relaxing the visa rules for many with British overseas passports. China is outraged by Britain's promise of a new home for hundreds of thousands, potentially almost 3 million people from Hong Kong.
完全属于中国内政。
No foreign country has the right to interfere. The groundless remarks made by the UK grossly interfere in Hong Kong's affairs and China's internal affairs.
Good afternoon, welcome to customers joining at Derby. This is the 1520.
H flew to London and then caught the train north to Sheffield, where Thomas was waiting for him.
Well, all I say is you make it. Yeah. Well, but I was very happy that he's here.
What did you mean by you made it?
It's just a funny way to say things, I suppose. Yeah, but at the same time, because when he came to England at that time, it wasn't that safe to travel anyway. You heard stories saying that especially young people, people that try to leave Hong Kong, got arrested in the airport. That's quite scary. And then so when he came to England, I was okay, give me a shout when you get to the airport, give me a shout when you get to the plane, give me a shout when you get to England and stuff. So I was quite worried. And then when he finally arrived, I was like, alright, cool. You're finally here now, mate.
So we've come into where you're staying in a small bedroom in a share house. There's a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of bags, clothes, a guitar book.
And a guitar.
So you're rolling out a mattress every night and then folding it up?
Yeah, currently it's just stay in this little bedroom and sleep in this folding mattress. Yeah, don't know.
And what are some of the things that you brought from Hong Kong? I can see a flag over here.
Brought some of stuff from Hong Kong or related with the protest and the social movement as well.
So this one is a black flag. It says, "Liberate Hong Kong, revolution of our times."
Yeah, it is one of our famous slogans, so it's quite meaningful for me as well.
Did you bring any other photos of your mom or anything else that was important to you?
At that time, I arrived UK from Hong Kong. It's quite rushed and don't have enough time to prepare all the things well. So,
do you think you made the right decision?
Probably it is the right decision because Hong Kong's situation is going worse.
He could potentially get into a lot of trouble if he showed the flag openly back in Hong Kong. The slogan, which was chanted by the protesters, is now banned because the government says it reeks of advocating Hong Kong independence.
As a result of the law and also because of the pandemic, the street protests have stopped. You used to see anti-government graffiti everywhere, but now it's all been painted over. A chilling silence has fallen over the city. Leading activists Joshua Wong and Agnes Chow are now in jail, while others like Nathan Law are in exile in the UK. But despite this, Arching has decided to stay.
I don't think people should take the opportunity brought by the protests to emigrate. Emigration is about living a better life in another place. But somehow it feels like people have given up on Hong Kong.
So he took to the streets again. We are walking on the other side of the street to Arching. It is very difficult to tell that there is a protest going on. He's walking silently wearing his business clothes.
I met some people I know, but I only said hello and walked by myself. I didn't chant any slogan. I just saw a lot of police filming. Every 10 steps, there were riot police standing guard.
In less than an hour, police had surrounded Arching and others. A police officer shouts, "Everyone stand here." Another using a megaphone tells the crowd, "This is a police operation. Stay where you are."
Police kept advancing and putting up cordon lines. When I was surrounded by police, I could still use my phone. I talked about my arrest on Telegram. I also told my friends and families too.
A white travel coach arrives. Arching is told to get on it. He walks quietly with the others onto the bus. Nearly 300 people, including Arching, were arrested that day.
H was asleep in his Sheffield bedroom when the news came through.
I
was worried, and I was so far away and couldn't do anything. There's some helplessness. With everything, I felt a bit lost and didn't know what to do.
It's a grey day here, and the autumn leaves are thick and wet beneath our feet. We've walked up a hill to Hardcourt Road here in Sheffield. On one side, there's a little bit of English woods, and on the other side, residential houses. This name, Hardcourt Road, has a lot of meaning for those from Hong Kong. It's where the government buildings are and where many of the protests and clashes took place. H jokes as we walk along that this is Hardcourt Road without the tear gas. but he doesn't look happy to be here. Let's walk down here so we're away from the traffic a little bit. It's a quiet suburban road, so on one side is a park, and then on the other side is traditional kind of Victorian terrace houses with a lot of cars parked. It's very muddy underneath our feet. So what kind of memories does coming here trigger for you?
It's a bit sad because I think the opportunity that I can go back to Hong Kong is changed just like a bit little and little. Also, it will be inevitable to feel homesick and miss my friends and a lot of families. Yeah.
So you feel really homesick and you miss them at the moment here?
Yeah, sure, definitely.
Martin wasn't there when Arching was released. 24 hours after his arrest, he walked out alone.
Actually, I didn't know Martin had gone to the police station trying to find me. It's heartwarming. After all, we just met over the internet and it's difficult to feel the connection. But since learning about this, I feel grateful for his help.
Police didn't press charges against him, but the arrest has rattled him.
I won't let myself be arrested again. I'll have to be much more careful in this regard.
So now his acts of protest are quieter rebellions, like choosing to eat in this restaurant for lunch, a place that supports the movement. They are called the yellow restaurants because the color yellow is associated with protesters. There are paper folding arts marking the Hong Kong police. There is also a mini lantern wall made up of dozens of colorful sticky notes. One of it says, "Hong Kongers, we have to persevere."
Even though we may think that China is a powerful country and it's difficult for Hong Kong to shake it, I think a totalitarian regime cannot last this long. When we read history, the Soviet Union didn't last for 100 years. So in this regard, I have some hopes.
I asked him whether he feels like he encouraged young protesters to go to the front line and how he feels about that now. What does he say to those that argue the protesters gambled the city's freedom away by pushing too hard, for being too violent?
I'm a peaceful and rational protester who thinks that bloodshed is inevitable in democratization. To be more realistic, there will be people who will have to sacrifice. Around the world, young people sacrifice the most. I'm no longer young, and I have my own burden, so I choose to play a supporting role. Sometimes I ask myself too, am I pushing young people to the extreme? Some people will die, but no one wants this. Maybe I'll sacrifice heroically later, no one knows.
In the UK, H spends his days getting up late, playing computer games and occasionally training with Thomas, punching, swirling and kicking at each other in a muddy field near where he's staying.
When I'm doing martial arts, it stimulates one's will to live or basic instincts. In the process, I enjoy the feeling of being alive and I exist.
H doesn't call his mum. They text though.
She has kept her son's room basically as he left it.
One day, when he comes back, there's still a room for him.
Joining him in the UK isn't really an option.
We have to consider whether we could make a living there. I don't really speak English, nor am I rich. It will be more troublesome if we go there. So when can we reunite? If Hong Kong is still under the control of the Chinese Communist Party, it will be difficult. I may not be able to see him for the rest of my life.
We've driven out of Sheffield into the Peak District, walking on the moors. It's a very foggy, misty day, so you can hardly see very far in front of you. And we've come to an edge, a ravine of granite boulders. He says he's freezing. It's a very alien landscape for him as he stares off into the whiteness.
Now I am in a foreign place, and about the future, well, on a Telegram group, a friend whom I'm not too close with talked about what he wanted to do in 5 years. As for myself, I don't even know what will happen in 5 days, not even 5 weeks. It is very difficult to have a concrete long-term plan. It's inevitable to feel lost.
Visions of the past and possible future.
Thomas and H sing together, a British pop song that's set in windswept Sheffield. It expresses the longing and confusion they're feeling so far from home.
When can you come back again?
That's all for this week's assignment. To Leave or to Stay was produced by me, Rebecca Henschke, in London, with Grace Soy in Hong Kong.
This is the BBC World Service. Is our world really changing?
5 years ago, the United Nations announced a 17-step plan to change the world. So we are traveling to 17 countries, meeting 17 17-year-olds.
My name is Victorine. Habari Kenya. That's a greeting in my national language, Swahili.
This week, we are with Victorine in Kenya, looking at goal number 3, good health and well-being.
The first sign I experienced was just a headache. Then all of a sudden I began losing weight.
Hundreds of thousands of children around the world die from malaria each year.
And I have seen my parents suffer malaria, teachers in school, even my dad's colleagues, everyone around me. There's no one who I haven't seen having malaria.
How is her community dealing with this disease? And can the United Nations goal be met?
Project 17. Wednesday at 13:30 and 23:30 GMT.
You're with the BBC World Service. On today's Science in Action, we hear how to make more of the RNA vaccines that do so much good against COVID-19. Instead of building more factories, get your cells to do the work.
If one strand gets in there initially, it copies itself, and then you have 100 strands of RNA. So that we need actually a much lower dose in the beginning, and so each batch of RNA just goes a lot farther.
The prospect of self-amplifying